Hello, Math 20-3. Oh, my computer just glitched me out all over the place here. Today we're going to do lesson 6.3. So we're going to do some more compound interest, but instead of using a table like we did in unit 6.2, where we did every single period, we're just going to use a formula to figure out at the end of your amount, like at the end of your term, how much money you owe. It's a much quicker way, but 6.2 allows us to truly understand compound interest and what's happening and why it's happening, which I think is very beneficial. 6.3 is all about just using a formula. The instructions for the formula and the info is right here. I'm just going to quickly go through it. This is the formula we're going to use for compound interest. Okay, the letters A, P, 1, little p, or I, little p, and N are all right here, so you can see all their definitions. A is essentially like your end value. P is the principal. That's your starting amount. I is your interest rate. Little p is the number of compounding periods in 1 year. So that's the number of times they're going to charge you in 1 year. N is the total number of times you're going to be charged. But I think the best thing we can do is just jump into this and start doing some questions. So let's scroll down here. If you want to read these for some further information on compounding periods, feel free. Let's just get into it though. So complete the table for an investment of $1,000 invested at 8% per A, that means per year, for 5 years. All right. And what's the number of periods? So for this question, what's the total number of times that you're going to get charged interest? And they give us 4 different situations. They give us annually, semi-annually, quarterly, monthly. And all those things are going to happen for 5 years. So if you're getting charged annually, that means once a year. So if you're being charged once a year, the total number of times you're going to be charged interest would be 5, because there's 5 years. If we were looking at semi-annually means twice a year. So if we're getting charged 2 times a year for 5 years, then 2 times 5 equals 10 times you're going to get charged. Quarterly means 4 times a year. If we're getting charged 4 times a year for 5 years, 4 times 5 would be 20 times you're being charged interest. And the last one is monthly. If you're getting charged monthly, that's 12 times a year. 12 times 5 gives me 60 total times they're charging us interest. All right, let's calculate all these different formulas based on these 4 different circumstances. So our formula, I will write right here, is A equals big P, that's your starting amount, times 1 plus I divided by, what's the letter they use? Little p divided by n. Okay. Let's try it out. So the first one, the equation would be A equals P. P is the starting amount, which is $1,000, times 1 plus I. Let's try to do colors that match here. I is your interest rate, which is 8%, but we want that as a decimal, so 0.08, divided by little p. Little p comes from here. So little p is coming from how many times you're charged in 1 year. Annually is only once a year, so I'm dividing by 1. Divided by n. N is the total number of times you charge interest. N is 5 in this question. So that is what I have to put in my calculator. 1,000 times 1 plus 0.08 divided by 1 to the power of 5. You definitely want to practice putting that in your calculator. Remember to do the brackets first. So go 1 plus and then 0.08 divided by 1. That'll give you an answer of 1.08. After you do the brackets, you do the exponent. So you do 1.08 to the power of 5. Hit enter. That gives you 1.46932. And then multiply that by 1,000. So do in the brackets first, exponent second, and then multiply by 1,000 to get a total of 1,469.33. I tried to get that through without before I sneezed. So it's $1,469.33. That's the total amount that would be in his investment account if he was compounding annually at a rate of 8%. Cool. Let's do the other ones. So if you're doing semi-annually, the numbers don't change too much. So the 1,000 stays the same. The 1 plus 0.08 stays the same because my starting amount and my interest rate didn't change. What does change is my little p value, which is twice a year. So that would be a 2 down there. And my n value would change because now it's 10, because there's 10 total compounding periods. If we put this in our calculator, again, we want to go 1 plus 0.08 divided by 2 to get 1.04. Do that to the power of 10 times that by 1,000, and you get an answer of 1,480.24. So you calculate in the brackets first, then the exponent, then multiply by 1,000. The next one, the 1,000 still doesn't change because it's still the same starting amount. It's 1 plus. Instead of it being divided by 2, that's going to change. I'm now going to be dividing by 4 because it says 4 times a year. The exponent this time will be 20 because there's 20 total times I'm being charged. To calculate, you do in the brackets first, so 1 plus 0.08 divided by 4. Do that to the power of 20, times that by 1,000, and you get a total amount of 1,485.95. Awesome. I want you to pause the video and try to solve the next part of this question. Hopefully you paused it and you came out with A equals 1,000. 1 plus 0.08 divided by 12 because you're being charged 12 times in a year. All to the power of 60 because you're getting 60 total charges. 1 plus 0.08 divided by 12 gives me 1.00666666, all that to the power of 60, times that by 1,000, and I get a total amount of $1,489.85. That is how much would be in my investment account if I compounded monthly for 5 years. Awesome. That's all we're going to do today. We're just going to do formulas for calculating compounded interest. Let's try this one. So it says Jennifer put $2,000 in an RRSP, that's a savings account, earning 9.5 interest compounded semi-annually, so that's twice a year. Determine the accumulated amount after 7 years. All right, let's try it. So we're looking for the accumulated amount. Our formula for accumulated amount is P1 plus I divided by little p to the power of n. We need to fill in all this information. So big P is your starting amount, which is 2,000. Then I go 1 plus I is your interest rate, but as a decimal, so that would be 0.095 if I divide it by 100. Divided by P, which is the number of times I'm being charged in a year. I find that value right here when it said semi-annually. That means 2 times a year. That means my little p value is 2. And that's all to the power of the total number of times I'm going to be charged interest. If I'm being 2 times a year for 7 years, 2 times 7 would be 14 times I'm being charged interest. If you can build these formulas, all you got to be able to do is a little bit of calculator work and you're going to be set. So we try this out. We do in the brackets first, so 1 plus 0.095 divided by 2. Do that to the power of 14, times that by the original amount of 2,000, and my total amount in my account would be $3,829.89. Not bad, right? As long as you can figure out the parts of the formula. Cool. Number 3. It says Lloyd arranged a personal loan of $2,500 at 10.75 per annum. That means per year, compounded quarterly. How much was Lloyd charged after 2 years? Okay, let's find out. So, A equals big P, 1 plus little I divided by little p to the power of n. We put this into our formula. Big P is 2,500. Then I've got 1 plus I. I is my interest rate, but as a decimal, so divided by 100, and you get 0.1075. Divided by little p is the number of times you're charged in a year. It says quarterly. Quarterly is 4 times in a year, so it's a 4 that goes down there. The n value is the total number of times you're charged. It's 2 years, 4 times a year, for a total of 8 times I'm being charged, because 2 times 4 would be 8. We put all that into our calculator, and we will figure out the total amount being charged after 2 years would be $3,090.87. Pretty expensive for a loan of $2,000. Oh, $2,500. That's not that bad though. Awesome. Number 4. Calculate the accumulated amount of a $1,250 invested at 6, and then it goes 3 quarters. To change that into a decimal so we can actually work with it, put 3 over 4 in your calculator, and it will tell you it's 0.75. So that means this actual amount is 6.75. Yeah, that's what this 3 over 4 means. It means 0.75. Per annum, compounded annually for 18 months. All right, let's try this out. Our formula is A equals the starting amount, big P, 1 plus I over little p to the power of n. We start to fill things in. My starting amount is 1,250. I then go 1 plus my interest rate, which we just found, is 0.0675. Remember to divide it by 100, right? Divided by little p is the number of times you're charged a year. It says compounded annually. Annually means 1 time a year. So it's divided by 1. All to the power of how many times you're going to be charged total. Now, we're being charged 1 time a year, and we had the loan for 18 months. 18 months is not 2 years, right? It's like 1.5 years. So that means the total number of times I'm being charged interest would only be once. I'd be charged interest at the end of the first year, and then I wouldn't be charged interest again because I never got to the end of the second year. If we put this into our calculator, you should get 1,334.38. There you go. I'm going to skip a couple questions here because you don't need to do all these. Let's do these two. We'll do number 7 and number 8. It says calculate the amount of interest earned on a $900 investment at 6.25% per annual, compounded quarterly for 3.5 years. All right, our formula hasn't changed. It's P1 plus I divided by little p to the power of n. Let's start things off with big P. Big P is your starting amount. I invested $900. That was my starting amount. In the bracket, I have 1 plus my interest rate. If I divide that by 100 is 0.0625. Divide that by P. P is my compounding rate. I'm compounded quarterly. Quarterly is 4 times a year. So I need to divide by 4. N is going to be tricky here. The reason N is going to be tricky is because the total amount of time is 3.5 years. So if I think about quarterly, I could go 3.5 years, so 3.5, times that by 4, and that will tell me how many times I'm going to end up getting charged. 3.5 times 4 is 14 times I'm being charged. Up there. We put this into our calculator. 1 plus 0.0625 divided by 4, all to the power of 14, times that by 900, and I get a total amount in my account of $1,118.18. Now the question this time didn't ask me for the total amount in the account. Instead, it asked me for calculate the amount of interest. The amount of interest is how much extra you pay instead of your 900. So what we want to do to figure out the interest is figure out the difference between what I started with and what I finished with. So if I go 1,118.18 and I subtract 900, that will tell me how much interest there is. In this case, it's $218.18. That is the amount of interest that you are getting. It's an investment, so it's how much you've earned. You've earned $218. Cool. Let's try number 9. John is starting a supply business and is borrowing $100,000 from a bank at 8% compounded quarterly. If he wants to repay the loan over a 5-year period, what will his monthly payments be? Okay, to figure out what his monthly payments will be, we'll have to figure out how much he owes this bank. So to figure out how much he owes, we're going to have to use our little formula of A equals P1 plus I over little p to the power of n. We can then start to fill things in. So big P is $100,000 because that's what I started with. And then I have 1 plus my interest rate is 8%, so 0.08 after I divide by 100. Divided by P, that's the number of times I'm being charged in a year. It says compounded quarterly. Quarterly is 4 times a year. So I need to divide that rate by 4. To the power of n, n is going to be 4 times a year times 5 years. 4 times 5 is 20. If I throw this on my calculator, my $100,000 loan is going to cost me, divided by or times 100,000. My $100,000 loan after 5 years will be a total of 148,594.74. So it's $148,594.74. That is the total amount that this, probably a mortgage, but this business loan will end up costing me. Now the question asked me something a little different. It said, what will his monthly payments be? To figure out his monthly payments, you're going to have to take the amount that you owe, which is $148,594 $74. You're going to have to divide it by the number of years that you're going to be paying, which is 5, and divided by the number of months in a year, divided by 12. So if I take that amount, I divide it by 5, that'll tell me how much I owe in a year. If I divide it by 12, that'll tell me how much I owe in a month. And that comes out to $2,476.58. That is what your monthly payment would be if you wanted to pay back your $100,000 loan in 5 years. It's a lot of money. Awesome. I think that does it for those types of questions. You can also figure out how much you have to invest to get a certain amount of money. So that's called present value. It's basically the same formula but rearranged. So you'll notice all the letters are the same. They just rearranged it. So they took this formula, A equals P 1 plus I over little p divided by n. They took that and they turned it into this. And now instead of calculating how much money total you're going to end up with, you can calculate how much you need to give someone to end up with a certain amount. So we'll do a couple questions so you can see what this looks like. Example 11, it says Hilda wants to invest an amount now so that in 3 years she'll have $8,000 available for her trip. Her bank will pay her 10% compounded quarterly. How much money does she need to invest now? How much money does she need to invest now means we want to use this formula instead of our other formula. So we want to use P equals A and then 1 plus I divided by P to the power of n. To use that formula, A is your ending amount. You want to end with $8,000 for a trip. Divided by 1 plus I is your rate. Your rate is 10%. If you divide that by 100, it's 0.1. Divided by little p is the number of compounds that's happening in a year. It says it's compounded quarterly. Quarterly is 4 times a year, so I have to divide by 4. To the power of n, n is that 4 times a year times however many years you saved for. You saved for 3 years. 4 times 3 is 12. To calculate this is a little bit harder than the other way. To calculate this, what we want to do is we want to figure out what this whole bottom thing equals. So I would recommend that you put this in your calculator first. So I would still have 8,000 on the top. And I'm going to divide it by, and if I put that in my calculator, do in the brackets first, so 1 plus 0.1 divided by 4, then do to the power of 12, and you get 1.34488824. And you want to use all your decimals that you can. Then I want to put that in my calculator. So I want to do 8,000 divided by that number, and I get that the total amount I should invest to be able to end up with $8,000 is $5,948.45. That is the amount I need to give now to be able to earn $8,000. Cool. Let's do one more and then we're done. I think that's it. Yeah, my sheet doesn't show another one, so let's find it. It says find the present value if an investment amounts to $3,600 in 1.5 years at 17% compounded semi-annually. Okay, find the present value. That means find the amount that you have to invest. So we're going to use this formula, P equals A divided by 1 plus I over P to the power of n. We start filling things in. A is your ending amount. So you're going to amount to $3,600. divided by 1 plus your interest rate. Your rate is 17%, so it's 0.17, divided by the number of times that you're going to get charged a year. The number of times you're going to get charged a year is semi-annually. That means 2 times a year. So I'm going to divide by 2. And then in the top bracket goes the number of times you're going to get charged total. In this case, it's 1.5 years for 2 years, or 2 times a year for 1.5 years. If you put that in your calculator, you'll realize that you're getting charged 3 times. If you calculate that, again, do the bottom first and then divide. You could try it on your own if you want. You should end up getting $2,818.47. That's the amount you would have to put in that investment account now if you wanted to end with $3,600 in 1.5 years. Cool. That is using the compounded interest rate formula instead of using those big charts that we learned yesterday. Much faster, but a little bit harder. More calculations, which makes it a little trickier. Make sure you do your practice. Take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon.